Alright, hey, welcome everybody. We're going to be doing 2-point perspective maze today. Notice the 2 vanishing points. That's how we know that this is 2-point perspective rather than 1. I'm going to start by just taking a second and finishing off the marks on the paper here. This is where we're going to draw our lines from in order to make the grid that we're going to use to complete this maze. If you notice, I'm only drawing the lines from the right side of the paper to the vanishing point on the upper left-hand side. The reason is if I was to draw them to the upper right-hand side, I'd actually be off the paper, which in this warm-up is represented by the box on it. Now I'm going to draw the ones on the left side of the paper to the upper right vanishing point. This is going to start to complete our grid that we're going to use in order to make our 2-point perspective maze. The ones on the bottom are going to go to both sides, and you'll see that as I speed up the video here, so not to bore you with my drawing. Alright, the next thing we have to do is we have to erase the path. You can kind of think of this maze as just a kind of tiny snippet of the larger maze, so these paths do not have to be solvable. As I go through and erase the path, I like to take a second every once in a while to kind of strengthen the line so that I don't get confused of where things are. So you'll see me going back over it to kind of make it darker. The only thing I would worry about as far as doing this is if you're planning on adding a lot of things to your maze afterwards that could go through these lines. If you make them too dark, it's going to be difficult to erase those. I think the more path that you have, the more interesting of a maze you can have, which also means the less other things you have to add in order to have the people that are viewing your maze think that it's successful. There are 2 different ways to go about this. One is to have a complicated maze, the other is to have a really complicated creative idea going into it as far as what you're going to add to it. One last thing to consider is if you notice looking at my maze as I go through, none of those walls are next to each other. If we end up putting the walls next to each other and don't leave a gap in between them of gridded space, the walls essentially end up being paper-thin walls and are very successful. We can go back and fix them later if that ends up happening, but it's best to try to leave a space in between so that we don't have to fix our mistakes and just do them right the first time. This is the part that can be the most confusing for people. We're going to take a look at all the different corners. If a corner can be drawn straight down through any white part of the maze, we're going to draw it. If I look at a corner and it goes down through a gridded part of the maze, I'm not going to draw it. The reason is the grid represents the top, the white part represents our path. If we can walk through the white part, we need to be able to go around any walls or corners or anything. And that's what we're drawing right here. We're drawing the straight up and down corners and edges of walls. If we weren't drawing them straight up and down, the wall would essentially be bent or leaning and it wouldn't exactly be a natural maze. If you want to throw some of those in there, you can, but I just want you to know the reasoning why they have to be straight up and down. You can use the edge of your paper to kind of guide your ruler as far as keeping that vertical, but it is important that they're straight and not bent different ways. Just take a second, check, and make sure I got everything. It actually looks pretty good, so let's go ahead and move on here. The next thing we have to do is to shade. If you notice, there's two different walls that head off to the left and walls that head off to the right. I'm going to choose the walls that head off to the left vanishing point, like the ones I just showed. I'm not going to shade any of the ones that head off to the right. I'm going to completely shade in all of the area, making sure that it's nice and blacked out. The reasoning behind this is we're going to assume the sun is coming from the top right. The lightest part of the maze would be on the opposite side of where I'm shading. The darkest part is going to be where the sun just spills over the lip there. I'm going to take a lot of time, make sure that these are filled in nice and completely, and as dark as my pencil will let me do it. I recommend you take a minute before you do this to check to see which walls need to be shaded. I like to just take my ruler and lay it down in one diagonal direction, and then I can just go through and mark any of the walls that are similar to the way that I want it to go. If I ever had to turn my ruler when I'm checking a wall, I know I'm doing something wrong. I'm going to speed things up here real quick. After I've finished filling in all of these walls, which I'll do in just a second, I have a choice to make. If I'd like, I can shade the other walls with more of a lighter gray. It really depends on if you feel like there's a good balance of light and dark in your piece. If it's looking a little too light, like I think this one is here, I'm going to take a second, go through and just kind of give these other walls a nice light shading of gray. That'll give my maze three different kind of values to it: super dark, a medium gray, and the super light. It'll help to balance it out really well. After I've finished shading everything in, like I'm going to do in about a second here, the last thing I need to do is to erase the grid on the top. When you're setting this project up, remember you want to be able to erase anything that you don't want to be seen later. It's really important that you draw those setup lines in the beginning lightly. It's hard to see if we draw too lightly, but it's also harder to not see it if we can't erase it in the future. So just, practice, working on drawing setup lines super light so that our final products can look nice and clean, just like I believe this one should. Alright everybody, here's the final product. I can't wait to see all of your work.